Welcome to the Pedagogy Primer podcast. I'm Mark Gallimore, Director of the Center for Online Learning and Innovation at Canisius University. In this episode, Dr. Jonathan Lawrence, Associate Professor of Religious Studies, joins two recent graduates, Mylan Hawkins and Abby Bradley, to talk about the use of games and game-based learning in courses. Professor Lawrence employs games in the Reacting to the Past series in various courses and also designs his own games for use within classes as well as other educational sites and situations. Mylan and Abby share student perspectives on the interactive challenges games bring to ethical and social problems versus more traditional pedagogies commonly found in college classrooms.
Welcome. I'm Jonathan Lawrence. I'm a faculty member in Religious Studies, and today, as part of the Pedagogy Primer podcast, we're talking about game-based pedagogy, specifically reacting to the past. As I said, I'm a faculty member at Canisius. I've been here since 2005, and I'm here with two of my graduating students, and I'll let them introduce themselves. They've been working with me as part of the CEEP, Canisius Education Excellence Program, I believe. And they've also been in classes with these role-playing games. And so, Abby, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Abby Bradley. I'm a graduating senior at Canisius this year. I was a psychology major. I was in the all-college honors program, and I had the opportunity to take two classes with Dr. Lawrence, and I got to engage in these reacting to the past games multiple times.
And Mylan.
Hi, my name is Mylan Hawkins, also graduating soon from Canisius College, class of 23. While here, I was both a journalism and strategic communication major, as well as part of the all-college honors program, as well as the urban leadership learning community. And I had the pleasure of being with Dr. Lawrence for 2 years for the CEEP.
So reacting to the past, and now officially it's called the Reacting Consortium, is a program that started about 20, maybe a little more than 20 years ago, with a professor at Barnard College in New York City. He's a history professor, and the first simulation game that he developed was called Threshold of Democracy, about Athens and the debates going on right around the time with the trial of Socrates, and how Athens was going to deal with its neighbors, how they were going to decide who could have the right to vote. And so that game started being used at Barnard and at other places as a way to engage students and get them thinking about and talking about what was going on. So rather than just having a lesson where they read Plato's Republic and talked about the themes, what was Plato saying the ideal king should be like, they were having to debate these things and try to convince people to take one side or the other. Many of these games have people on different sides and then a certain number of students in the middle who are unaligned or on certain topics are undecided, and it's the task of the people on both sides to try to convince them. And so, Abby and Mylan, if you could sort of talk from a student perspective, you came into class and you heard me say we were going to be doing role-playing games, and can you talk about what that looked like in the class?
Sure. So before I even took a class with you, Dr. Lawrence, I heard that you had been using these Reacting to the Past games in your curriculum. And I was intrigued. I definitely had a lot of questions. And I definitely am the type of student that puts a lot of effort into papers or assignments or homework assignments. So having to kind of shift my focus for the semester into more of a creative way of showing what I knew was definitely a challenge. But it when we go into the classroom, everybody receives a role. You get a role sheet. You have to do some background reading just to understand what was going on in the time of the Reacting to the Past game that you're playing. And there's also a lot of collaboration outside of the classroom too between different students who are playing different characters in this game. So it's really more of a collaborative, creative experience in the classroom, and it's not as traditional as a normal class might be.
Well, I think Abby said it really beautifully, exactly how the class was. I know from my perspective, I had it a little differently. I took this class with Dr. Lawrence. At the time, it was like Honors 110. And it was during the midst of COVID. So like our class was like kind of set up as a hybrid class. We like showed up, Dr. Lawrence explained that we're going to be doing this role-playing game. And it's like, how are we going to do that as we're supposed to be like, 6 feet apart? But Dr. Lawrence, I'm not sure if you can remind me of what the app was.
Flipgrid.
Yes,
Now it's just
Flipgrid.
called Flip.
Really? Well, I mean, we use Flipgrid, so I think that was a really great way to kind of make us try something new while we're also going through something new. So as students, we use Flipgrid. We were able to post our videos, be able to like even post another video in response to someone else, and be able to really kind of communicate all like, while being in our dorm rooms, being safe. And then I also had the pleasure of taking class with him in person. And again, like it was a lot of us kind of coming up with our own speeches, but like not talking as ourselves. So we had the chance of being creative in that way. We had the chance of like kind of in class, like talking to like our classmates and kind of figuring out like, hey, like, oh, are you going to say this? Are you going to do that? What was our plan going to be? Like a lot of times we were kind of established like into certain groups. Like I know for like one game, I think I was like kind of labeled as like a goldsmith. So like, there's other goldsmiths. So like we had this in common. So I was able to talk to other goldsmith, or say like for like a Viking game, I was part of like, I guess a tribe of other Vikings. So having to collaborate and talk to them about that. And so I think it was a great way to meet other people that you didn't know. So I came into class, I might have not known anybody in that class, but by the end of the day, we're over here arguing about like, okay, so should we implement this rule? Well, what about this group? How can we change their mind? Okay, you're gonna give the speech today. Okay, I'll give the speech tomorrow. I'll second that. I'll raise my hand when you do this. I'll be all theatrical and I'll make a scene. It was just really fun to see how we could be silly, but also learn.
Excellent. And based on some of what you've described, this overlaps with things like case studies or even sort of reenactments, scripted scenes playing out something. But the difference, of course, is that when you're given a script, you may be doing things to act it out, but you're still sticking to the script. When they perform Shakespeare at Delaware Park, they may change a few words, but they're still pretty much sticking to the script. The part of the issue here is that you may go in with a prepared speech, but then if Abby says something in the speech that totally changes the argument you were prepared to make, or totally eliminates, contradicts the argument you were prepared to make, you have to be able to respond on the spot. And now the other issue that we may want to get into a little bit later is that as much as possible, the idea is to try to stick to what's historically plausible. And so Mylan mentioned the Vikings game, which is one of my favorites to play. Give a shout out to my friend Mary Vellante who created this. And of course, part of the thing is you're not going to suddenly have someone say, well, I'm one of the villagers, and I'm just going to get up my Uzi and get rid of all the Vikings. That's not time suitable. The villagers, the island has been attacked by the Vikings. The Vikings have taken captives, and so the villagers have to try to make peace and work with the Vikings to make sure that the Viking ships can be repaired, but they have to try to build understanding and find ways to trade. So, a more historically plausible scenario would be, well, what if we provide food to them and it's laced with something that's found, some plant that's found on the island that is going to cause them to go to sleep. That's a plausible scenario and requires the students to do a little bit of digging, historical digging, but it's not going to contradict history. You have to try to stay in the role, in the time frame as much as possible, but you also have to be able to be prepared to adapt and respond differently based on what others have said. So also bringing in this, and if you don't, obviously since some of these were several years ago, I don't expect you to remember every single rule or detail. But one of the other issues is that some of the games are formatted almost around legislation. As Mylan mentioned, that's one model. Some are very competitive where for one team to win, the other loses. Some of them also, one of the more recent games we used are more conversational and collaborative, trying to come to a decision that the group can accept. So can you talk about maybe some examples from the games you've played?
Sure. So one of the games that I played was Greenwich Village. And in this game, we had a couple different factions. There were the Bohemians, there was a suffrage faction, there was a labor faction. And in this game, I would say it was more competitive in my experience. And each of these groups, specifically the suffrage faction and the labor faction, were kind of volleying back and forth between who would have a greater population in the Greenwich Village and which faction would achieve their goal, whether that be suffrage or labor unions and things of that nature. So that was definitely more competitive, and I would say that people in the classroom definitely embodied like the competitive nature. Obviously, like in a way that was appropriate for the classroom, but in that game specifically, it was ongoing for, I want to say 3 or 4 weeks, and we played for quite a long time. And so over the course of a month, you really got to know your character. And when you showed up to class, everybody knew that that was your character, and they expected you to, you know, argue for your faction or say something thought-provoking or, you know, start a little bit of debate in the classroom over, you know, suffrage or labor. And it ended up being really fun, even though it was competitive, because at the end, obviously, one faction did have to prevail. That's how the game works. But I mean, I think it also kind of ties into legislative debates too, because obviously those were both things that revolved around legislation. So it was kind of cool to see that play out in our Reacting to the Past format. And things like that actually do happen in real life every day. So even though it was a simulation of the past in, you know, the 1900s, early 1900s, we see debates around different political movements or different laws that people want to be passed. We see that all the time in our politics today. So it was a nice connection, even though it was based back in the early 1900s. It kind of emulated similar debates and competitive atmospheres that we still have today, too.
Excellent. Mylan, you have?
Yeah. Well, I know for my game, it was like a lot earlier, specifically the threshold of democracy. It was in Athens in 403 BCE, very long time ago. But yeah, I had the pleasure of playing the role of Thucydides. I feel like I always say this wrong to this day.
Thucydides?
No, wait. Thrasybulus. Oh, Thrasybulus. Yes. I remember, I think I asked you like maybe 6 times during that class how to pronounce his name. But yeah, they were like a leader of like radical Democrats. That was my role. And in this role, I was supposed to kind of convince the other people in my class, the other members of like different groups, to allow for medics and slaves mostly to have voting rights. So even though like, you know, this is a long time ago, like we're still kind of having these conversations of like what rights should people have, funny enough. And so I think that this game was definitely kind of allowing me to develop speeches that, you know, kind of felt very personal, I would say. I think it caused me to think a lot about like, okay, what does it mean for these people to have rights? You know, doing my own little background research into like, okay, why is it important for my character to establish these rights, as well as talking to other people in my group. So I was like essentially the leader in this group. Other people were to come to me and I was supposed to kind of advise them of, okay, like, oh, this is what the next move should be, this is what that move should be, as well as I think kind of exploring secret motives. I think that's one part of the game that is downplayed, but really comes out kind of towards the end when you kind of find out the secret motives that each character has. That, oh yeah, while I am pushing for people to have rights to vote, I'm also trying to become the leader, like the sole leader of this democracy here in Athens. So yeah, I'm pushing for like a right agenda, but what is my own secret motives behind that? And then what are the other secret motives behind other characters? And it kind of seeing that, oh, are they going to choose to go with the secret motive, or are they going to kind of allow their own, I guess, knowledge now in the present, be like, oh, maybe that isn't the right move because this might happen and that might happen. So even though a lot of these games were set in the past, I think it's interesting to see how we as students kind of bring this modern thought and this modern twist, because we see what the history was, but okay, not necessarily changing it, but just, I don't know, having different decisions because of our own experiences and our own backgrounds as just like students in the 21st century.
Right. So for instance, when I was a participant in a run-through of the Athens Threshold of Democracy game, someone tried to have a little fun and brought in the slogan, "Make Athens Great Again." And, okay, it was a little bit of a stretch, but it was still at least a fun way to get into that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add really quickly, too. I think having different sides and different factions and that competitive nature also helps you to have empathy for when today you see someone who has a different view as you, or who has like different thought processes about different topics. In another one of the games we played, Detroit 1859, it was a game revolving around what the most effective way to go about
Ending slavery.
Ending slavery. Thank you. I was trying to figure out the best way to say that. Different ways, the most effective way to go about ending slavery. And I played the character of John Brown, who was a very radical thinker. And he had really radical views on what the best way to end slavery was. And on a personal level, like me as a person, Abby, that was like kind of crazy for me to think about, that this person actually really truly like believed that this was the correct way to go about things. But I had to embody him in my character and go to class and go to our games and, argue for this radical movement. And so I think it kind of helped me to like have empathy for the other side sometimes, even though we were all moving towards the same goal of ending slavery. Like everybody has different ways that they thought was the best way to go about it. So having to kind of embody someone who had a different view that I had personally and like really try to sell it in class kind of helped me to have a bit of empathy for those people then today who do have different views than me and who are arguing for things that I might not personally believe in. But kind of like simulating that in the classroom kind of helps you to kind of see like, oh, okay, like they are a person, they did believe that, and they were trying to have good intentions, and it helps you to see a bigger picture and not get so angry right away when somebody has a different view as you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, also like just I think highlighting like the role book and the game book and like the role sheets. I think that was a really great way of like getting us into character, because it wasn't just like what happened. It's like, okay, these are all the things that your character believes in. These are all the things that they support. And, here is like, almost like not fun facts, but just little like kind of tidbits of why they did the things that they did. And then also like connections they have to other characters. So we kind of just got to see this kind of overview of who they are as a person. And I think it kind of made me even more curious of like, okay, like what did this person write? And so I would kind of do some like background research and just like, oh, like what were the pieces of like, literature that they wrote at the time, and reading that, and then also reading and seeing how it aligns with my role sheet, just so I can have a clear picture of like, oh, they said this, but this is what they meant. And sometimes like they don't necessarily align, but I feel like it was a nice way to make a connection, to be like, oh, like what caused them to change their mind, and kind of going back and forth between, outside research, the research that was provided by Dr. Lawrence, and just kind of, again, coming to like these conclusions of like how to best portray our characters.
Excellent. And that actually also brings up the fact that even though there may be certain debates and certainly you're provided with certain texts, that the idea is to try to use them, which of course is also one of the things that applies to many classes, even more traditional forms of teaching, that you're asked to read primary texts. But now you're presenting them as if you're part of that context rather than sort of reading it just as if it's something you've taken off the shelf. But one of the other components in some of the games is that there are sometimes ways that the individual students can maybe earn points for their team, or as part of their task, do something creative. So, Mylan, I don't know if you remember, but one of your classmates had to perform a scene from a Greek play.
Yeah, that happened. I think that's always the best part of when people really show up in character. Like actually like showing up kind of with their own like paper mache crowns. I think that was a really great one. I think when Dr. Lawrence showed up kind of dressed like in a sheet, almost like as a toga, I think that was really great. I'm trying to remember exactly what your role was. It was during the Council of Nicaea.
I was the emperor then, Emperor Constantine.
Yes, Emperor Constantine.
And the one time we ran the game, I was presiding as the emperor, and so yes, I had my royal purple sash, and one of the bishops got up there and started criticizing me. And of course, this is also the sort of the fun interaction on the spot. So I just sort of crossed my arms and was glaring at them. And they were like, well, yes, I know you're the emperor, but we need to tell you this. And it was just sort of one of those fun, spontaneous moments. Abby, as I recall, you had to participate in a sort of skit in character as if you were performing part of a labor union protest or something like that.
Yeah.
And some of your classmates sort of drew their own art of the styles that were being introduced in the early 1900s and sort of bringing in all these other kinds of things. Some people, I think, even put posters around campus in favor of suffrage. I don't think anybody took up the opportunity to sing the Internationale, the Marxist hymn on campus and record themselves. But, there can be fun things like that. One of the other things, though, that I want to mention is that sometimes these games, and maybe you recall, include the game runner intervening a little bit. And sometimes it's very scripted and planned. Sometimes for the Athens game, you sort of you start every session with prayers to Athena, and you draw a slip from, I think they called it Pandora's box. And so sometimes it might be something good that gives extra voting power to one of the factions, or it might be something bad. Lightning struck in one of the quarters of the city, and so the aristocrats lost some money and lost some influence because their grain stores were damaged. But again, these are the elements to sort of bring it to life and keep you on your toes. So now, having had several years of college education, and this is not intended as a criticism of any colleagues, but how do these games and the interaction with the texts compare to perhaps how other classes have approached these kinds of things?
Sure. So I will be the first person to say I am not a history person. I never enjoyed memorizing dates or people or events or laws, anything of that sort. I'm more of a science math person. So when it comes to history or religious studies and that aspect, just kind of learning about how things progressed, that was never anything that I was super interested in, which is why I was excited, to be a part of the All College Honors Program, because I knew that they did have these unique approaches to learning. But specifically with the Reacting to the Past games, I wasn't sitting and reading a textbook, and I wasn't sitting and memorizing these dates with these people, with these events for the exam on Friday. I was actually embodying a character that may or may not have been real at one point in history. But by kind of living through these experiences through our gameplay in the classroom, I think I actually would I do remember more from them than I would have if I would have just been reading a textbook or writing a basic paper, because I would show up to class, and class is 2 or 3 hours long, and for the majority of that time you're in this game and you have to keep track of what's going on, and you have to be prepared for your speech, and you have to listen to what the other people are saying, because that affects what you're going to do with your speech in the next 15 minutes or what you're going to say next week in response to it. So having to be more present and actually paying attention to what everybody else around you is doing and making sure that you're prepared to come to class to play this role, I would say that it really ingrained the information deeper for me, because I had to know it like the back of my hand when I showed up to class in order to best portray my role.
Yeah, I think for me, it was fun. I think that's first and foremost. I want to say that it was fun to be a part of the class and do something as unique as this. A lot of my other classes were very much lecture format, so you kind of show up, you take notes. But with this class, I had the chance to be an active participant in my classroom, and so did all of my other classmates. And I think that is what really sets apart this class and the Reacting to the Past games from any other class, because that you are not just showing up and going to be like kind of talked at for like, 55 minutes, an hour or so. You actually have to show up, make sure you have your materials in line, because I think Abby said it again, like really best, that you have to be prepared for whatever may happen in those 55 minutes. And it might be something good. It might be something bad. It might be something that you need to actually go back and reflect on and change and edit like really quickly. But it definitely was an experience that I'm happy that I had the chance to do within my 4 years here at Canisius, that I got to be able to write speeches, that I got to be able to perform them in front of my class. Like I think the college requires everyone to do some type of oral communication class, but I think this class should be considered as one. The amount of speeches that we do, they don't have to be long speeches, but they're still encouraged us to talk to our classmates at the head of the room. That I really got to learn interpersonal skills. I got to be able to converse with my classmates, both like in the classroom and outside of the classroom, and I just got to know people more. And I think that in college that it's very easy to kind of sit down, look straight ahead, and just do the work. But I actually got to, be friends with the people in my classroom. I got to really see, that their character, but also like, what are some funny elements that they add that, makes their personality kind of jump out? What is something that they can bring from their major into the classroom and really like have some insight on that I might not know about? So I think it was just an overall like fulfilling experience, I would say.
I do also want to add, a lot of times in like a traditional classroom setting with the lecture format, you take the exam. You often have to do like a group project or a group presentation. And I don't know about you, Mylan, but I always really despise those types of projects because it's really frustrating, to rely on other people if they aren't willing to, put in the same amount of effort and, collaborating on something. And that aspect can be really difficult. And, the professor always says, well, in the real world, you have to work with other people. And that's kind of just how it works. But with this class, it's definitely group work, but in a different sense. Everybody has a different role. So it's not like one person can rely on the other to kind of carry the group in that aspect. Like everybody brings something unique to their role. And I would say that this emulates more so what it would be like to, work with a group or work with coworkers in the real world experience once we go off and graduate and have jobs someday. Because in the real world, I mean, maybe sometimes you're putting together a presentation and presenting it at the end of the week, but a lot of time it's like the day-to-day tasks that you're doing with other people. And I think that the reacting to the past games really makes you, make those connections outside of class and in class when you're talking to other people. I think it does represent better what it's like to work with others when it comes to beyond the educational setting.
Excellent.
And sorry, I just want to add one point. I'm going to piggyback off of Abby's piggyback a little bit. I think also something great that Dr. Lawrence does that should really be highlighted is that he sends out a Google form at the start of the semester for the class to ask. It's like the Google form kind of is a series of questions about how the role-playing game is going to go. So basically, like, how involved do we want to be? What kind of speaking parts do we want? Do we want to be like, conniving and do tricks? Or do we want to be like kind of honest? Like, he really kind of curates the roles that he gives us through the Google form. So it's not just like, oh, here's this role and you're going to just take it. No, he's really thoughtful about putting together which role based off of students' comfortability, in speaking and writing. He really try to utilizes our skills and our own strengths as students to really set the class up. And I think that's really good to point out.
Well, and I will confess that sometimes I, either because I know the student previously or because of conversations that I've had with them or the way they answer it, sometimes I do put people in roles that I know they're going to have to stretch. But I do also try to respect if someone says, I am terrified of public speaking, do not make me be one of the ones that has to give the most important speeches. And there's many of the games have rules that can be used for that. So the historian or the journalist who's going to be taking the notes on all of this and writing something but doesn't have to stand up and speak. But one of the most fun moments in some of these games has been seeing the student who in the first game or the first class they took with me said, I am terrified of public speaking, and then is getting up and pounding on the podium and just engaging with everybody and seeing that growth. I do want to point out that obviously, this can be harder to implement in a class that is very content heavy. That was one of the challenges in with the Western traditions class that we don't teach the same way anymore, but where we were expected, I think, what was that? That was prehistory up until 1400. So there's an awful lot of history and content. And so I sort of balanced it with texts from different times and places not related to the games that you were expected to read every week. But it still is getting at many of the same pedagogical outcomes that are sort of across the curriculum of critical thinking, of understanding historical context, of learning the details. But now you're learning the historical details and who was involved in Athens or in early 20th century New York, because you're using them, not just because they're names you have to memorize. But one of a couple more things I want to sort of highlight. So Abby mentioned the issue of empathy and the idea of sometimes having to play a role that is saying and doing things that you would never in a million years in real life see yourself doing, that it helps you afterwards to maybe identify, okay, these were people. They aren't just the sort of caricatures that we can think of. But and I'll ask in a second if you have anything to add on that. But one of the other aspects also comes with the fact that at the end of the game, now sometimes Abby mentioned the Greenwich Village game, and there's certain elements that are tied in terms of the historical things that were happening, and I'm being careful what I say about this because I am actually going to be using that game again in the fall. So in case any of my current students are listening, I don't want to give away everything, but that the outcome the students are anticipating based on the way the votes have gone is also affected by certain historical factors. But then at the end, we also step out of our roles and sometimes even have them rip up their name cards or whatever, and then start to say, okay, so what really happened? And often the games are designed that it will usually stay fairly close. But sometimes, for instance, with the Athens game, when I was a participant and not running the game, Socrates was exonerated and was not convicted and was not put to death. And so one of the things that I really like in the sort of debriefing and the processing afterwards is the fact that you can start to realize that one person's decisions or one group's actions or decisions, or if one group really doesn't get their act together and they don't sort of show up and make their case, can influence how the decision-making goes and can change the course of history. So do you have any sort of ideas on any of that from your own experiences with the games?
Yeah, I think that when you have the debrief and you really find out what happened in history, that it's kind of like eye-opening to see either like how similar or how different you are to the people that are in the past. Like, okay, like how are we making these same decisions and coming to these same conclusions? Are we seeing the same overall big picture or small picture and that is guiding our decisions? Or, does maybe time and, again, experiences kind of change things for people? And I think that, seeing kind of classmates grapple with, okay, I'm going to do this decision mostly because I'm like, this is what the facts are showing me, versus another student who's kind of like caught up in the history of being like, well, this happened for these reasons, and kind of them going in with a mindset of like history backing them and kind of going forth with that. I think it's kind of fun to see how different students approach it, and mostly because that affects the game, but also seeing like the decisions of the past and being like, oh, these are the facts of what happened and this is how they came to the same conclusions.
This might be a little bit too like meta and like big thinking, but like,
Go for it.
I guess if there are outcomes that are different than what happened in real life, it really just kind of puts things into perspective of like, we are, like our society is where we are today because those couple people decided to put in the extra effort, or this group of people decided to like really take a stand and like make it known that this is what needs to happen. And in one way that can make, the decisions that we're making today for our society seem like a little bit more scary and like serious and intense. And it's like, oh man, like we should be taking this a lot more seriously. But on the other hand, I think it also comes down to like relating to what you said, Mylan, of like these are people that are like making these decisions too. And it's interesting to see how different people react to different outcomes. And so I guess when sometimes the results of the game don't necessarily match up with the results of what happened in history, it really just creates like a perspective, I guess, of, we could have ended up that way and history could have gone that way. And like the decisions that are made tomorrow regarding the future of our society or our country or our civilization, it's the same way. We take it really seriously and we get really concerned, and that's important. But on the other hand, like society keeps moving, and I think that these games and the outcomes differing really can kind of highlight that.
Excellent. One other thing I wanted to mention, and I realize I keep saying one other thing, but you can tell I'm also kind of excited about these, is that in some cases it allows us to talk about really heavy issues, and issues with very current feelings and emotions, but with a little bit of historical distance. And so, obviously in recent years, there have sometimes been things that have happened in society that we need to talk about, but are still very fresh wounds. And so to, get directly into, say, talking about Black Lives Matter in the classroom or about the 2016 election or the 2020 election could get very complicated, but we can talk about similar ones. So Mylan's class, we played a game, and this is where the language, playing a game. Do you really want to say you're playing a game about the Black Death? And my colleague Amy Brown Curry, who wrote the Plague game, even sort of toned down some of it as people started to use the simulation during the pandemic, because when she started it, there was a sort of Monty Python, bring out your dead kind of thing in it. And she, I think, wisely recognized that this is not going to work very well in the moment when people are coming into this. But I remember testing that game in the summer as a participant and realizing that so many of the debates that we were having in summer of 2020 were the same, could be translated very easily into the debates that they were having in Norwich, England in 1348 as the Black Plague was arriving and ravishing Europe. And so we could have those conversations, but we didn't have to get into discussions about ivermectin and masking mandates and all those kinds of things. But it does allow us to talk about very, very serious topics. And as I say, sometimes I try to avoid the game and play aspect, that it's a simulation, but it certainly gets in there. I do also want to point out, Mylan, you and the other SEEP students a year ago helped us do a survey. So, we can show that it's not just a couple of you who really enjoyed the games. There were a few people who didn't like them, and that's to be expected. But as I recall, the results were overwhelmingly positive. I even had one student in the midst of the pandemic, when we were playing them completely online and asynchronously, called the games an immersive experience, which I just sort of, love the fact that they still felt the immersion even in an online setting. Obviously, it's even more exciting when you're there in the moment and someone pulls out their secret agenda, or when I pulled out my whistle and got to silence someone who was being too radical in the game. But all of these issues are ways to engage, and I've had colleagues at some schools that have said that they've heard people going out into the classroom and out of the classroom and still sort of hyped up because of what just happened in the game, and everyone else is wondering, what are you talking about? This does bring me to sort of the final step of this in the my secret agenda for domination of the college is that after starting these, and I guess I should back up and say my initial plan, in fall of 2019, the dean announced that he was offering innovation grants, and so I did also want to give the plug and acknowledgement of that would allow faculty to do a project that they couldn't otherwise have time or funding to do. And so I wrote to him and I said, well, I've always wanted to try this out. I'm going to be teaching Western traditions, and I think this looks like a perfect tool for Western traditions. And so he sent me, gave me the funding to go in January of 2020 to Athens, Georgia, where we played the Athens game for the Reacting Winter Institute. And my plan was at the time that it was just going to be for Western traditions. And so I went with the mindset that this is where I'm going to introduce this because I liked the way some of my other classes were already set up. And, of course, little did I know that January 2020, we were heading towards world-changing events. And so as that spring moved into the summer and I was starting to think about, okay, how am I going to implement this even with it potentially being online or hybrid, I did something that when I describe this to some of my colleagues who use these games at other schools, they sort of look at me like I was absolutely insane because many people will start and they'll say, okay, I'll start with one game. I'll introduce that one game in my course and then maybe next year introduce a second game. And well, fall of 2020, I was implementing it in 3 courses. I'd even changed the textbooks I was using. I reshuffled everything in the courses. In fall of 2020, I was starting simultaneously in the same week 3 different games in 3 different courses and then continuing on with second and third games in some of the classes. It was intense. Perhaps not the recommended path towards implementation, but it was a way to keep things going even in the midst of this. And I apologize to any of my colleagues in other classes whose students may have, been spending a lot of time preparing for the simulations and less engagement. But I did have some less engagement with other courses. But I did have some students say that in the midst of the pandemic, this was one of the things that sort of kept them going with something that was completely different, but manageable compared to the sort of intellectual and emotional burden of dealing with the pandemic. But so as I started getting into that, I started to wonder, well, what if there was a way to do a game about the Jesuits? And so initially my plan was to write a full-length game, and I have a draft of that. I even tested it in the summer of 2021. But I also realized that probably at a lot of schools, there are not going to be many people that interested in the Jesuits to spend 3 weeks talking about the year 1820 when the Jesuits were reconvening after being banned. So I also have written and tested, and Mark, you participated in a test version of this as well, a short game that one of you mentioned earlier, the game where, Mylan, you played a goldsmith. The premise in that game, now it's called Monumental Consequence. It used to be called Bomb the Church, which has really scary kind of name recognition. But some of these short games can be used as ways to either introduce what it's like to even do role-playing or to sort of fill in and address specific historical moments or other things that otherwise you couldn't necessarily do 3 months. The Monumental Consequence is basically sort of the monuments men kind of dilemma from World War II where President Eisenhower even said, look, there's going to be moments when you have to face a choice. The enemy is holding a church or a museum or some kind of cultural place, And you have to make the decision, do we destroy that cultural object, which is a long-term harm to society, but it's also a military objective, and how do you balance that? And so I always start the semester off with that one, getting students, they come in with no preparation, no awareness of what's about to happen to them, and they're given a role and 5 minutes to sort of figure out what's going on. So I've now created a short game about the Jesuits, and the setting of that one is that the students are some are playing the Jesuits, defending themselves against accusations in the mid-1700s, right before their enemies sort of conspired and got them banned by the Pope. Some are playing ambassadors representing the kings of Europe who were upset because the Jesuits were seen as troublemakers. Some are representing the archbishops who are concerned that the Jesuits were not following fully formal, proper Catholic teaching. And some are playing the crowd who are the sort of wild card here because they're hungry, and so whichever group promises to feed them will get their support, and the crowd can threaten to riot if they don't get what they want. But so at a Jesuit college, where one of our goals is to help students understand who these Jesuits are and where they come from, and most students do not come to the college knowing much about the Jesuits, or if they know that the Jesuits exist, the fact that it's a Jesuit college has little to do with their choice in coming to the college. And so the hope is that this game can be used not just in my courses, but in several courses. There's even been talk in terms of ways to introduce it into things that students experience in their first year so that we can pique their interest. So we're going to wrap up in a moment, but any last thoughts from either of you? Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this.
Yeah, Dr. Lawrence, I just want to say thank you so much for, one, I guess, introducing the games, and then two, for like being a SEEP student and just being able to explore it even further and just to help you along on this journey of getting the Jesuit game started. I think like lasting thoughts is just that it has to keep going. I think these games are such a cathartic feeling of being able, again, like you said earlier, to talk about really tough topics, but kind of talk about it not being yourself. And I think that when students are kind of allowed to have that separation of, oh, I'm playing a character, but having like a really deep discussion is something that's really important. And so I think that these games will be really instrumental in getting students engaged again, because I think COVID has really, really messed up the education system. So I think students need something a little bit more digestible nowadays. So I think that's going to really help with that. And then again, I think that by bringing the Jesuit game in, it will pique the interest of students, because I think students don't come in at all really knowing much about the Jesuits, and that for this to be a Jesuit institution, to have something like off the gate for first year students to experience, and again, for it to be, I wouldn't say like low stress, but something, again, like I said, the games are fun. So do something that is fun, educational, and allows them to build, critical thinking skills, to build interpersonal skills, and to just gain more confidence in themselves by being able to talk and interact with their fellow students is something that's for the good, and for the good of the college at that.
Yeah, I guess I would just add that as a student who I know I mentioned before, I was nervous and I was concerned about how these games would go. And I know I met with you, Dr. Lawrence. I emailed you. And I was like, I'm really concerned about my character. I'm not sure what to do. And I definitely was overthinking it. But I think it's important to still challenge students in these different ways and provide unique opportunities. And just echoing what Mylan said, too, about students kind of just being burnt out of everything that's traditional about education after COVID. And I think this really puts on like a fresh face for what's possible in the classroom. And I applaud you for, kind of spearheading this at the college.
Thank you so much. Thank you, both of you, for taking the time during senior week. So congratulations on the upcoming graduation, and good luck in all that comes next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Canisius Pedagogy Primer podcast. Relevant links can be found in show notes. For more helpful resources for teaching and learning, visit www.canisius.edu/COLI.